They brought Lyra Vale to the bridge in a chain of cold blue light. It hummed at her wrists like a captive insect, tiny sparks tasting her skin with each step. The dreadnought's command hall opened like a silver amphitheater, tiered consoles, translucent tactical glyphs raining from the ceiling. A viewing pane the size of a cathedral window staring into the broken halo of Icarus 9. The planet below lay in bands of ash and glittering ruin, continents cut open, oceans opaque as slate. Vraxan officers stood at their stations with the wary stillness of hunters who had already fed. Their scales were the color of old copper, their ridge plates polished to a ceremonial dullness. Every eye followed her. Some were curious. Some were hungry. All were certain of how this moment was supposed to go. A clearing opened near the command rostrum. Captain Vraxathal waited inside it, tall even by Vraxan measure, mantle clasped with a bar of meteor iron. He held a graviton blade at rest, its edge barely visible, bending light in a way that made the air around it seem tired. "Terran," he said, his voice resonant and uninterested. "Kneel." Lyra stopped at the base of the rostrum. Her ankles locked, hips loose, chin slightly lowered in the posture she'd learned on wind-swept training yards back when there were yards to train in. She saw the adjustment the captain made, half a step forward, then another to correct it, as if the deck itself had shifted under him, and only he had felt it. She looked up through a loose fall of hair and took in the bridge. 42 crew, 8 security, 3 lieutenants with command glyphs circling their throats. The pale seam where the viewing pane had been reseated after a micrometeor strike. The hum underfoot, 2 short, 1 long, placed the ship on a low burn orbit. The oxygen mix stung with an antiseptic sweetness her lungs disliked. The lights were 5 degrees cooler than human standard. Her breath fogged faintly. "Kneel," the captain repeated. Lyra smiled. It wasn't a grin, not a baring of teeth. Just a small lift at one corner, a private recognition of a joke no one else could hear. The sound of the bridge did not stop. It retreated. A tech at the starboard pit paused mid-swipe. An ensign's frill flattened. The graviton blade's edge sang an almost imperceptible note as Vraxthal raised it an inch, then held it there. Held it far too long. "Translate that expression," one of the lieutenants murmured. "It indicates reassurance," the translator replied, voice thin with confusion. "Or challenge." Vraxthal descended 2 steps. "You are out of time, little mammal. Your species is a memory. Kneel, and I might keep you intact long enough to map your fear centers." Lyra let her eyes flick to the blade. She made her smile smaller, almost apologetic. "Your hand trembled when you said that." His frill tightened. "It did not." "Then the deck moved," she said softly. "And only you felt it." A ripple moved through the crew, silent, not quite visible. She watched it travel like a pressure wave, curiosity colliding with instinct, instinct colliding with the rigid walls of drilled obedience. She had seen that wave before, on a cliff during a storm, when wind met rock and the rock remembered it had once been sand. "Begin," the captain said to the medic at her back. Sin-wave pain crawled up her arms. The restraints were careful things, built to broadcast discomfort without tearing tissue. She tasted metal, and under the metal the faint bitterness of recycled heat sink gel. A distant part of her noted the pain profile, the pulse spacing, the lack of drift in the current. Automated, efficient, impersonal. She held herself still and did the more difficult work. She listened. Noise gives away more than eyes do. She listened to the captain's breath, slow, then uneven for a single count, then slow again. She listened to the bridge heartbeat, the pattern crew fall into when a superior performs a ritual humiliation. She listened to the planet below, or rather to the quiet it cast, the kind of quiet only a scar can make. "Terrans respond best to physical parsing," the medic announced. "We should remove the teeth." "No," Vraxthal said, never taking his eyes off Lyra. "We will start with language." The blade lifted. "What are you called?" "Lyra Vale. Who holds your leash?" "I don't like leashes." She tilted her head. "You?" A few of the crew made tiny movements, then forced themselves back into proper alignment. On some level, they had expected begging, erratic pleading, or that bright animal franticness the Vraxans cataloged and studied. Instead, they were hearing something that did not belong on a deck of command. Conversation. "Your colony," the captain said. "Icarus 9, it resisted. We emptied its cities. We salted its memory. And still you reproduce yourselves out there in the dark like mold." Lyra's eyes flicked to the shattered world, then back. "You misread mold," she said. "It rarely dies with the first bleach." A thin hiss went through his teeth. The blade's point touched the hollow at her throat. The blue light at her wrists brightened, then dimmed again. "You attempt humor," he said. "A denial of reality." "I'm very realistic," she said. "Reality is why I'm smiling." He leaned closer as if he could read the answer in her pupils. Close like that, she could smell him. Copper, ozone, and the faint tang of something like pepper moss. He did not stink of stress. He did not shake. And yet he wanted something from her he did not know how to ask for. That unsettled him more than her defiance. "You will scream," he said. "You will prove to my crew that the myths of your people are dust." "You need me to scream," she corrected. "Or their myths come back." Silence pooled in the command hall, a deepening mouth of absence. The officers were pretending to work, hands careful, eyes too still. The lieutenants pretended not to watch. Even the ship seemed to lean toward her. Vraxthal straightened. "Increase the amplitude." The medic touched a control. Pain knifed her forearms, bright as a magnesium flare. Lyra felt her pulse climb, and her body ask for what pain always asks for: contraction, noise, a sudden animal sound to expel pressure. She held her posture. She pictured rain hitting a corrugated roof at the academy, pictured a drill instructor tapping her sternum with a baton and saying, "Calm is a choice you make before the storm." Her jaw loosened. She exhaled through her nose, slow as if cooling tea. The longest minute passed. When the amplitude decreased, she took the relief the way a desert takes shade. Without gratitude, simply as a fact. "Your species is supposed to be fragile," the medic murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. "Fragile things learn patience," Lyra said, "or they don't last long enough to say so." Vraxthal moved the blade until the edge hummed at the base of her right ear. "Perhaps you do not understand your state?" "I understand it intimately," she said. "I also understand you are performing for them." She nodded slightly at the watching tears. "And performances require an audience that believes." "What should they believe?" he asked, amused despite himself. "That you never blink," she said. "That your hand doesn't tremble. That the deck doesn't tilt. That power is seamless." She let the smile return, smaller still. "They saw you hesitate when I smiled." He said nothing. A muscle in his throat flexed. Lyra let the quiet do its work. Fear loves words. Respect loves proof. She gave them neither. Instead, she lifted her shoulders a fraction, enough to make the restraints chime, and turned her head until the blade's edge almost kissed her cheekbone. "You?" "Mistake survival for surrender," she said. The line hit the bridge like a small contained detonation. Not loud, not dramatic, but irrevocable. The words made a shape inside the Vraxans' heads, a map with a road they had not seen before. She felt the crew's attention sharpen, and behind it, something older stir. The inherited memory of predators who once tested one another not through volume but through stillness. Vraxthal's crest flared. "Isolation," he said almost pleasantly. "Let her composure starve in the dark." Two security officers stepped forward. One reached for the restraint link. Lyra watched his hands. Vraxans hid their nervousness in the tendons of the first knuckle. His were stone. "You carry stories," she told him quietly, without looking away from the captain. "Let me put one in your pocket." The guard hesitated. Vraxthal's head turned by a degree. "Proceed." They unclipped the line. The pain faded to a warm ache. Lyra rolled her wrists, as if considering the sensation, then let her arms fall. The guards bracketed her, careful, respectful in the way soldiers become around an opponent who refuses a script. As they led her away, she looked once at the shattered planet. In the ash-ringed geometry of the broken continents, she saw the outline of a classroom, a rusted fence, a boy racing her across a floodplain, a woman watering tomatoes on a rooftop under a blue tarp sun. She kept walking. The isolation corridor was warmer. Conduits lined the walls like veins. The hum underfoot changed. Short, short, long. Maintenance decks below. Air handlers somewhere left. She counted paces out of habit. 12 to the lift. 43 down. 8 through the door. The cell was a triangular wedge carved from the ship's spine. One wall, a lattice of bioceramic that pulsed with a faint, steady glow. No bed, no water line, no obvious vents. The guards pushed her inside. The door whispered shut, and for a moment the ship's noise fell away so completely she could hear the tiny clicks her bones made as they cooled. She did what she had trained to do since the day the academy burned. She laid the world out in pieces. Oxygen mix, temperature, hum, frequency, light rhythm. She found a flaw, barely there, in the glow lattice, a point where the bioceramic's pulse skipped half a beat. She smiled to herself, thinking of a deck that tilted when only one person felt it. Somewhere in the ship, a rumor began. Someone whispered at a console. She smiled. Someone else asked, "Why would Prey smile?" A junior officer said, "Because he blinked," and immediately wished he hadn't. Lyra sat cross-legged in the center of the cell and placed her palms on the floor. She breathed through the ache in her arms and let her heart beat slow until it met the ship's hum and matched it, not as submission, but as measurement. She had not come here to prove that humans could take pain. Pain was a boring truth. She had come to teach them a different lesson, that composure in a predator's mouth is a blade. In the dark, she closed her eyes, rebuilt the bridge from memory, and moved the pieces until they made a new picture. The captain was not a fool. He was disciplined, ceremonial, careful. He would come back because the performance had gone wrong. He would come back because the crew's belief had loosened. He would come back because nothing frightens a ruler more than a story he cannot control. Lyra's smile lingered, private as breath. "Let's see," she whispered to the empty cell. "What breaks first, steel or pride?" The cell was a wound stitched into the dreadnought's spine. It pulsed faintly, a heartbeat of machinery that never quite reached silence. Lyra Vale sat with her back to the wall, eyes half open, breathing in time with the rhythmic hum. The air tasted faintly of iron and antifreeze. Each pulse of the floor carried the ship's movements. Rotational shifts, thermal expansions, the nervous tick of a vessel built by creatures who feared stillness. She counted every sound. Precision was comfort. Counting meant control, 3 hours. No food. 2 water releases from the wall tube. No words. She could live with that. Humans had always learned to live inside the noise of captivity. What mattered wasn't endurance, it was observation. Every breath of the cell told her something. The ship's core wasn't as stable as it pretended. She could feel the fluctuations like a heartbeat skipping behind metal bones. That was useful. A hiss came from beyond the door. The lattice light flickered. Someone was there, smaller, lighter footsteps than the guards. She turned her head, listening. The door cracked open. A young Vraxan officer stepped inside, nervous enough to smell like static. His scales were paler than the captain's. Unseasoned, she guessed. He carried a tablet that looked too large for his hands. The glow from it painted his crest silver. "You should not be awake," he said, voice low. Lyra tilted her head. "You should not be here." He flinched but didn't retreat. "I'm supposed to record your vitals?" The captain ordered silence, but He hesitated, eyes darting to the walls. "They said you smiled. When he threatened you." "I did," Lyra said. "Why?" She leaned forward, elbows on knees. "Because he blinked first." His crest rippled, uncertain whether that was humor or confession. "That doesn't make sense." "It will," she said softly. "When you see it happen again." He swallowed, tapping something on his device. "You are strange?" The captain says humans are built wrong, too fragile for higher gravity, too emotional for logic. But you don't— I'm not special, Lyra interrupted. Just adapted. Deathworlders evolve in chaos. You evolve in order. Chaos remembers longer. He studied her, uncertain. If you are chaos, he said, why aren't you afraid? I am, she replied, voice calm. That's the difference. His fingers twitched. For a second, she thought he might ask another question, but the door hissed again. 2 heavier sets of steps this time. He stiffened and left without another word. The door sealed behind him, cutting off the light. Lyra leaned back, letting the faint hum of the ship return. Fear wasn't her enemy. It was data. It told her how close she was to the edge, how much energy she could still spend. The captain didn't understand that. He mistook composure for absence of fear. She would teach him otherwise. Hours passed. The rhythm of the ship changed. Engines idled lower, air pressure thinned. It meant the dreadnought had entered a slower orbit. She imagined the crew whispering about her again, the girl who smiled. Myths always spread fastest in silence. The door opened again, harsher this time. 2 guards entered, rifles humming. Between them stood Captain Vraxithal. He didn't speak right away. He studied her like a sculptor examining flawed stone. The edge of his blade reflected in his eyes, casting slivers of light across the floor. Your silence has become an infection, he said. The crew forgets hierarchy. Maybe they remember something older, she replied. His crest flicked upward. You think you understand my kind? I understand predators, she said. They all want certainty. He approached her slowly, each step calculated. And what do you want? Balance. Through defiance? Through memory, he frowned. Explain. Lyra stood, wrists still bound by the blue restraints. Earth wasn't a paradise, she said quietly. It was a graveyard that taught its children how to stand in storms. We built stories around that, never to glorify pain, but to remind ourselves what fear means. We didn't conquer fear. We made peace with it. That's why your threats don't work. You don't understand the tool you're holding? His gaze sharpened. You believe fear makes you strong? Only if you don't hide from it. He studied her face a long moment, searching for weakness, some crack in her calm. There was none. The silence stretched thin. Your planet burned because of arrogance, he said finally. You provoke what you cannot defeat. Then why are you trembling? She asked. He froze. For the briefest instant, a muscle jumped in his jaw. She saw it. He knew she saw it. And that single flinch, small as breath, undid everything his uniform was built to protect. His blade lowered half an inch. You are testing limits. I'm defining them. He turned sharply to the guards. Return her to the command hall. If she wishes to speak, she will do so before witnesses. They hesitated. Sir, the crew, do it, he snapped. The walk back through the corridors felt different this time. The crew who had once looked at her with contempt now looked with curiosity, and something else beneath it. The kind of unease born from realizing the universe was wider than the rules they'd memorized. She was placed again before the captain's chair. No blade this time, just light, holographic glyphs spun around her in scanning arcs. They mapped her vitals, bones, neural activity. On the main screen, her heartbeat appeared as a glowing thread. Explain this, said a lieutenant. Her readings show suppression of pain response. Impossible for her biology. It's possible, Lyra said, glancing up. Fear and pain are neighbors. You can't silence one without the other noticing. The officer blinked. She's answering. The captain gestured for quiet. Continue, Terran. Speak. Lyra's eyes wandered across the bridge. Every pair of alien eyes waited. Even the hum of machinery seemed to lean toward her. You want to know what makes humans different, she said. You think it's muscle or brain chemistry or luck? It's none of that. It's context. You come from a world that obeys rules. We come from one that kills the rule makers. Her words carried like a current. She saw the younger officers shift, their rigid posture cracking. We survive because nothing ever stayed predictable, she continued. Every storm changed shape. Every predator learned faster. Fear taught us patterns, then broke them again. You think control is power. We learned that chaos is the only honest teacher. Vraxthal rose from his chair, tall and imposing, but no longer untouchable. You claim superiority, yet your kind destroyed itself. Maybe, Lyra said, but we learned from it. Tell me, Captain, when was the last time you truly bled? When was the last time your empire fought something that didn't surrender? He said nothing. The question landed like gravity. Her voice softened. You've built a civilization so safe you've forgotten why you learned to fight. You've mistaken order for strength. That's why you're afraid of me. A low hiss rippled across the bridge. No one moved. Even the consoles seemed dimmer. Enough, Vraxthal said finally. You speak too much. Because silence is contagious, she replied. And you already caught it. Something cracked in his composure then. Not visibly, but in the sound of his breathing, too sharp, too human for a moment. He turned away, signaling the guards. Restrain her. Lyra didn't resist as they reached for her arms. She didn't need to. She'd already won what she came for, their attention. Ideas spread faster than force. They brought her to the lower deck again. The corridor lights flickered with each turn. The guard to her right muttered something in Vraxan, barely audible. What did you say? She asked. He hesitated. I said, you look calm for prey, she smiled. Because I'm thinking. About what? Which part of this ship breathes the loudest? He frowned, not understanding. She noted his pulse, the angle of his rifle, the key pattern on his wrist terminal. Every detail mattered. Back in her cell, she pressed her palms against the lattice again. The pulse was weaker now, flickering irregularly, a flaw. She could feel air bleeding through a microfracture near the lower seam. That was her way out, eventually. For now, she sat still, replaying the expressions on the bridge, the flicker of doubt in officers' eyes, the captain's restraint eroding grain by grain. Empires didn't collapse in explosions. They cracked in whispers. She whispered to the dark. You mistake control for safety. The cell answered with a hum, deep and hollow. Like an old heartbeat waking. The lights dimmed. Lyra exhaled and smiled into the dark. Let's see what breaks next. The alarms began as a low murmur, a tremor beneath the ship's bones. Then came the rising tone, a metallic scream that spread through every corridor like panic-made sound. Lyra Vale opened her eyes in the dark cell. The hum she'd listened to for hours had shifted pitch. Something inside the Valkyrith had broken. She moved to the wall lattice and pressed her palm against the flaw she'd found earlier. The bioceramic pulse stuttered, faint, uneven. A hairline fracture ran through it now, glowing dull blue where the ship's internal pressure pushed too hard. She smiled slightly and whispered, You blinked again, Captain. The door hissed open without command. Not guards this time. Automatic override. Emergency mode. The red haze of alert lighting bled into the corridor. She stepped out, barefoot, wrists still bound in dim blue cuffs. No one stopped her. The lower deck was chaos. Vraxan officers shouted orders in clipped mechanical bursts. The sound of claws on metal filled the hall as soldiers sprinted toward the reactor core. Through the translucent panels, Lyra saw the panic ripple, hierarchy fraying into instinct. The smell of overheating circuits hung heavy, sharp as blood on copper. She moved unnoticed. Panic created invisibility. When everyone is afraid, no one looks twice. At the junction to the command lift, a figure blocked her path. Young, pale-scaled, the same officer who had spoken to her before. His crest was slicked flat with sweat. How are you free? He stammered. The ship freed me, she said. He looked down at the cuffs. You shouldn't be here. The captain is losing control, Lyra finished. Tell me where the reactor is. He hesitated, glancing toward the flashing warning sigils. You can't. If you go near it, the security drones will... Then they'll meet something new. Her eyes locked on his. You asked me why I smiled, remember? This is why. He swallowed hard, then gestured left. Level 4, Core Chamber A. But you'll never make it there. I already have, she said, brushing past him. You just haven't realized it yet. The lift doors opened to a storm of light and movement. Steam vented from ruptured conduits. Energy arcs crawled along the bulkheads like lightning trapped in a jar. The ship's voice, once calm and absolute, now stuttered in broken Vraxan syllables, repeating the same phrase, Containment failure imminent. Vraxthal stood on the central platform, barking orders. His armor reflected the emergency glow, fractured crimson over bronze scales. Crew officers scrambled around him, their movements sharp with desperation. When he saw her step onto the bridge, time seemed to pause. "Restrain her!" he roared. No one moved. The crew hesitated, glancing at one another, then at Lyra. Fear had changed its target. She took a slow breath. "You built your empire on obedience," she said. "What happens when they see disobedience survive?" Vraxthal's blade ignited in his hand, light bending around its edge. "You caused this." "No," she said. "You did, when you tried to prove you were stronger." He lunged. The blade slashed through the air, carving sparks from the metal railing. Lyra moved aside, faster than instinct should allow, and the weapon hit only shadow. The energy field from the impact rippled across the deck. She spoke evenly, voice cutting through the sirens. "You don't need to fear me, Captain. You need to fear what I remind them of. Silence," he shouted. "Exactly," she said. "That's what always follows us." He charged again. This time she caught his wrist, forcing the blade aside with a twist that used his weight against him. Her cuffs burned bright, energy surging as the field overloaded. They shattered in a crack of blue fire. Sparks scattered like shattered stars. For the first time, the captain stepped back. Around them the crew watched, frozen, unable to decide if they were witnessing mutiny or revelation. Lyra looked at him with calm pity. "You mistake power for control. They're not the same thing. You think chaos will save you?" he hissed. "It already did." He swung again, but this time his movement lacked precision. She sidestepped and let his own momentum drive him into the console. Systems sparked, alarms crescendoed. The bridge lighting flickered out, replaced by the cold glow of the planet below, visible through the panoramic glass. Icarus 9 hung beneath them, a ruined jewel of stone and ash. Lyra turned toward it. "That's where you learned to fear us. You burned our cities and thought that was the end. But humans don't end. We adapt." "You're alone," Vraxthal growled. "A relic of a failed species." "Maybe," she said, "but relics remind the living what they've forgotten." She reached for the console beside her. The human neural implant in her wrist, silent since her capture, flared awake, interfacing with the ship's failing system. Data streams spilled into her mind like cold light. She saw every weakness, the pressure imbalance, the unshielded conduit near the reactor spine, the path the captain had ignored because he'd never imagined prey could think like a predator. She rerouted the energy surge, stabilizing it just long enough to access the ship's broadcast array. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Giving your empire a gift," she said. "A story." The comm system came alive. Across the fleet, thousands of Vraxan channels blinked open, broadcasting the bridge feed, Lyra standing before their captain, unarmed, surrounded by silence. "This is Lyra Veil of Earth," she said, voice steady. "Humanity remembers." The message echoed through every ship, every outpost, every Vraxan command node. The words struck like gravity. A reminder, not of power, but of the species they thought extinct. Vraxthal lunged for the console. Lyra moved first, slicing the control conduit with the energy from her broken cuff. The deck shuddered violently, red light flared, systems collapsing in sequence. "You'll destroy us all," he snarled. "No," she said quietly. "Just the illusion that you were safe." The bridge lights died completely. In that breathless dark, the captain's blade flickered out. The last sound was his breath, harsh, uneven, frightened. When the auxiliary power returned, Lyra stood alone. The command platform was empty, except for the echo of burned metal and the faint, sterile scent of ozone. The crew had fled. The captain was gone. Perhaps into the smoke, perhaps into myth. It didn't matter. She turned to the viewport. The wreckage of Icarus 9 glimmered below. fragments of ice drifting across its surface. For the first time since capture, she allowed herself to exhale without restraint. The dreadnought hung dead in orbit, lights fading one by one. Lyra accessed the final system, the environmental core, and keyed in a simple command: release gravity locks. The ship began to drift, pulled slowly toward the atmosphere of the ruined world. She walked to the center of the bridge and sat down. No fear, no triumph, only balance. Through the hull she felt vibration, the descent beginning, a fitting end, for a vessel built on control, now surrendering to gravity's will. She looked up at the dark ceiling and whispered, "You wanted silence, Captain. Here it is." The sound of the burning atmosphere swallowed everything. Hours later, the Valkyrith lay half-buried in the ash fields of Icarus 9. Among the ruins, a single distress beacon blinked weakly. Inside the silent wreck, one transmission repeated itself across every frequency: "Humanity remembers." And throughout the empire that had forgotten fear, a new rumor began to spread, of a Deathworld girl who smiled when threatened, and how, when she finally spoke, silence followed. Ash drifted through the air like dying snow. The once mighty dreadnought Valkyrith lay sprawled across the ruins of Icarus 9's equatorial ridge, its hull split open like a wound. The sky above was a pale orange bruise, radioactive dust reflecting the weak light of a dying sun. Lyra Vale crawled from the torn fuselage, hands scraped raw. Her breath came shallow and metallic, lungs adjusting to the world that had birthed her. Gravity pressed heavier here, real and merciless. She stood slowly, muscles trembling, then steadied herself and looked across the wasteland. The crash had burned half the ridge to glass. Shattered conduits glowed faintly beneath the surface like veins of light in black stone. Pieces of the ship's frame jutted from the ground at odd angles, humming with residual charge. In the distance, she saw smoke spiraling from what was once a city. Her city, maybe. She couldn't tell anymore. For a long moment, she didn't move. The silence felt enormous, almost alive. The Vraxans had worshipped order and noise, the hum of engines, the precision of command. Now all that remained was quiet, the kind that listens back. A faint sound broke through the wind. Movement. She turned. A shape stumbled from the wreckage, the young Vraxan officer who had once dared to speak to her. His uniform hung in tatters, one arm slick with dark green blood. He froze when he saw her. "You're alive," he rasped. "So are you," she said. "For now." He laughed once bitterly. The captain didn't make it. The others, gone. The ship's heart burned through the decks. Lyra nodded. It was never the ship's heart that broke. It was belief. He looked at her, confused, then winced as pain caught his side. "We were gods among lesser species. You made us afraid. Why?" She crouched beside him, studying his wound. "Because fear reminds you that you're alive. Without it, you forget the cost of power," he grimaced. "You sound like the captain near the end." He kept saying your name. "He thought killing you would fix the silence, did he?" she asked softly. "He died trying to prove it." Lyra stared toward the horizon, where the first embers of re-entry fires still burned in the sky. Then he finally understood something human. He frowned. "What's that?" "That some truths can't be ordered. They have to burn their way in." She rose, scanning the wreckage. The dreadnought's communication spire was buried halfway down the slope, still flickering weakly. A pulse beacon. Its signal could reach orbit, maybe farther. She started walking toward it. "Where are you going?" the Vraxan called after her. "To make sure they hear the story right," she said without turning back. The climb was brutal. Wind lashed against her face, carrying the scent of scorched metal and long-dead earth. Her boots crunched over fractured plating. Once she slipped, catching herself on a jagged strut, blood smearing against cold steel. The pulse beacon lay embedded in the rock, half buried but still alive. Its emitter core pulsed dimly, a fading heartbeat. She knelt beside it, fingers tracing the interface ports. The technology was alien, but patterns always repeat themselves. She could work with that. "System, initialize diagnostic," she whispered. The beacon responded in fractured syllables. Power, 12%. Transmission unstable. That'll do. She opened the panel, rerouting what energy remained. Her implant flickered to life, a faint blue thread beneath her wrist. Connection established. The officer approached slowly, cautious. "You're calling for rescue?" "No," she said. "I'm calling for witnesses," he frowned. "You think anyone will believe you?" "They won't have a choice." She entered the command string, voice calm, deliberate. "This is Lyra Vale of Earth, survivor of Icarus 9. The Vraxan dreadnought Valkareth has fallen. The empire that built it has forgotten why fear matters. Consider this message a reminder." The beacon hummed louder, signal stabilizing. Across the system, satellites still in orbit would catch it, carry it outward. Somewhere, other species, traders, scavengers, hidden human enclaves would hear it. "You're awakening ghosts," the officer said quietly. "Ghosts built your empires," she replied. "You just stopped listening." He sat beside her, exhausted. "And what about you? What will you do when they come for you?" "Adapt," she said simply. "It's what humans do best." They sat in silence, listening to the beacon's rhythmic pulse. Wind swept over the wreckage like breath over graves. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. The sky turned a bruised indigo, streaked with red clouds lit from below by molten wreckage. Lyra built a small fire from shattered conduits and carbon foam. It burned strangely, green and white, flickering like liquid glass. The Vraxan officer watched her from across the flames. "You don't hate us, do you?" She poked at the fire with a shard of metal. "No, hate's a waste of energy. You were following instincts that worked until they didn't." He studied her profile. "You talk like someone who's seen the end of things before." "I have," she said. "Every human has. Our world taught us endings come in waves. You either drown in them or learn to breathe underwater." He gave a dry, uneasy laugh. "Maybe that's why your kind scared us. You don't know when to stop." "That's survival," she said, meeting his gaze. "Not arrogance." He nodded slowly, then stared into the fire. "What happens now?" She looked toward the horizon. A faint shimmer of movement glowed there. Ion trails from orbit. Someone had received the signal. Maybe friends, maybe predators. Either way, history was awake again. "Now," she said, "we find out who's still listening." Hours later, Lyra stood alone atop the ridge, the wind cutting through the torn fabric of her uniform. The officer slept by the fire, breath steady. Below them, the dreadnought's hull groaned under cooling metal, releasing bursts of pale vapor into the night. She closed her eyes and let the wind carry the distant hum of the beacon, somewhere in the endless dark between stars. That signal was spreading, telling a story not of victory, but of memory. It would reach the colonies that had hidden, the scattered remnants of humanity that refused extinction. It would reach the alien stations that once profited from Earth's fall. It would reach the Vraxan High Command, where silence now meant fear reborn. She imagined their faces when they heard her voice. Some would laugh. Some would panic. But a few would understand the truth she'd been teaching all along. You cannot erase the species that learned to turn fear into a weapon. Behind her, the young officer stirred. "Lyra," he murmured, half asleep. "Why didn't you kill us when you could?" She didn't turn. "Because extinction isn't victory." He was quiet for a long time, then whispered, "Then what is?" She watched the horizon, where the first silver line of dawn crept through the ash clouds. "Continuance." The word lingered like smoke. As the sun climbed, light struck the wreckage, transforming twisted steel into molten gold. The fire died to embers. Lyra stood tall, her shadow stretching long across the ridge. Her reflection glimmered faintly in the glassed earth, tired, scarred, human. And behind that reflection, the shape of the fallen dreadnought looked almost like a monument. The silence was complete again, but different this time. Peaceful, not hollow. The kind born after storms. Lyra touched the edge of her comm unit one last time. The beacon still blinked faintly in rhythm with her pulse. She spoke quietly, almost to herself. "To whoever hears this, Remember, fear isn't our enemy. It's our compass. Follow it and you'll find us. She let the device rest in the dust. The wind carried her words into the open sky. Then she walked down the ridge, leaving behind the grave of the Valkyreth, her footsteps soft in the ash. The sun rose higher, painting the horizon red and gold. Far above, the echo of her message raced through the stars, a single human voice threading through the void. And wherever it reached, silence followed.